At that baby shower, while everyone expected cute gifts, light-hearted laughter, and that sweet atmosphere that usually surrounds such a celebration, one gesture completely changed the way I saw my own family. It was supposed to be a simple, special day full of affection. The tables were decorated in pastel shades, the balloons formed a perfect arch near the wall where the photos would be displayed, and everyone commented on how that baby would be received with love. The air seemed light, vibrant, welcoming. But behind the lively conversations there was a detail I hadn't yet noticed, and it would come to light in the most unexpected way. As the party went on, I truly felt like I was experiencing a moment of togetherness. People circulated with colorful juice cups, took funny photos with props, and my family seemed to be living one of its rare phases of harmony. But that feeling didn't last long. A subtle discomfort began to appear, like a silent warning that something was about to go off script. First, there were the lingering glances between some relatives, then small muffled comments, and then that crooked smile that always put me on alert. Nothing concrete, but enough to trigger that uneasy feeling in my stomach. It was then, during the gift-giving ceremony, that everything fell apart. There, in front of everyone, something that should have symbolized affection transformed into a silent display of inequality. As I was about to give a simple but carefully chosen gift, I realized something bigger was happening, an invisible division, a veiled judgment, a cruel comparison. And in that instant it became clear that what should have been a moment of unity would turn into a watershed moment in how I perceived each person present. The party was simply impeccable, the kind that looks like it came straight out of a decorating magazine. The tables were set with light tablecloths, delicate centerpieces, and tiny baby shoes scattered as decorations. The sweet smell of the freshly decorated cake mingled with the fragrance of the flowers, creating an atmosphere that instantly made anyone feel lighter. The warm lights hanging from the ceiling illuminated everything softly, as if someone had planned every detail to convey coziness. And in that perfect setting, the guests seemed truly happy. Broad smiles, lively conversations, people taking photos of every corner of the house to post on social media. In the midst of it all, I was calm. For a few minutes, I allowed myself to believe that this would be a special moment, one of those rare times when the whole family comes together without tension, without veiled disputes, without exhausting comparisons. I walked around the room, greeting everyone, receiving hugs, hearing compliments about how good it was to see everyone together. I felt a genuine relief in my chest. It seemed that, for a moment, I could truly relax. Everything seemed too perfect to go wrong. But, as always, perfection is fragile. Little by little, small details began to catch my attention. First, a few quick glances averted the instant I noticed them. Then, muffled giggles between two aunts nudging each other while looking in my direction. And then, the comparisons began. Those phrases that seem innocent but carry venom. Wow, she deserves all the best. Some people are born for great things, right? Others help as they can. Nothing was said directly to me, but everything seemed pointed at me. It was at that moment that I realized that, despite the brilliance of the party, there were shadows moving in the corners. Something was out of place, something was being prepared, and even without understanding it yet, my heart began to close, as if it knew that this perfect scene was about to reveal its true color. When the moment finally arrived to open the presents, everyone gathered around the main table. There was a certain anticipation in the air, that typical atmosphere of collective curiosity. Each person held their cell phone, ready to capture the best moment. And then a huge package wrapped in shiny paper and with ribbons so well made they looked like the work of a professional was placed before my sister-in-law. The size of the package already suggested that there was something important inside. Everyone moved closer, almost pushing those in front, as if they were about to witness something grand. My sister-in-law began to open the gift with an expression that mixed surprise and rehearsed delight. When the wrapping was removed, it turned out to be a luxury baby stroller, one of those that look more like a futuristic vehicle than a children's item. The impeccable leather, the chrome frame, the flawless design, everything screamed status. A murmur immediately filled the room. People exchanged astonished glances, and soon the silence gave way to an explosion of applause. The aunts clapped with exaggerated enthusiasm as if they were witnessing a television award. The uncles made loud comments. Now that's a gift worthy of her. Nothing less than she deserves. Look at the quality of this, my God. Even the cousins, who normally didn't even pay attention to these details, approached to touch the stroller and comment on the features they clearly didn't even know how to use. The praise was so abundant it seemed rehearsed, almost a collective need to reinforce the grandeur of that moment. While everyone else was cheering, I stood there, observing. And that's when the emotional trigger hit me. It wasn't a gift born out of necessity, affection, or usefulness. It was a trophy, a symbol, a carefully chosen object, not to help the baby, but to show the world who was most important in that family. The difference between what she received and what I received wasn't just in the appearance of the gifts, but in the symbolic value each one carried. It was at that moment that I realized that the stroller wasn't just pushing a baby. It was also pushing a clear message. Some they were treated like showcases, while others, like me, were pushed into the silent background of the family. After the euphoria created by the luxury stroller, the room was still buzzing with exaggerated comments, loud laughter, and that atmosphere of collective celebration. My sister-in-law was still posing for photos, showing off the gift as if it were a work of art. Then, almost without ceremony, someone from the family turned to me and said with a hurried smile, "Ah, this one's for you," handing me a plain, thin, white envelope without any embellishment. There was no ribbon, no special paper, not even my name carefully written on it. It was just an envelope. And in that instant, without even opening it, I already knew that it wasn't a gift, it was something else. I opened it slowly, trying not to look uncomfortable. Inside, a contract, a cleaning contract, a list of tasks, schedules, requirements, and obligations they expected me to fulfill as if it were a natural part of my role in the family. The paper described detailed duties: cleaning the hall after the party, organizing the tables, disposing of the trash, washing the utensils, and periodic maintenance at future family events. It was as if they had decided that this was my place and that they needed to make it official. For a second, there was no sound. The room, once so noisy, became strangely silent. This silence wasn't respect, it was embarrassment. Some people immediately looked away. Others bit their lips, as if trying to suppress a laugh or an inconvenient opinion. And then came the muffled giggles, the kind that cut deeper because they carry mockery and superiority. One aunt whispered to another, "At least now he has something to do." Another added, "That's all he knows how to do, right?" I felt all the uncomfortable stares landing on me, as if they expected me to simply accept it, smile, and say thank you. But inside, something began to simmer. The feeling wasn't just humiliation, it was erasure. As if in front of everyone I had been reduced to a function, not a member of the family. I wasn't seen as someone with a history, effort, or dignity. It was as if I had been placed in an invisible box, the box of someone who serves, who delivers, who deserves nothing more than the bare minimum. And at that moment, while holding that absurd contract, I realized it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a message, and a message delivered without any shame, in front of everyone. I held that contract for a few seconds, but inside it felt like I was holding an enormous weight. Shame came first, that warm sensation that rises up your face and makes your heart beat faster. Then the humiliation, which is even worse. It doesn't scream, it doesn't make a scene, it just settles in silently, like a shadow that covers everything. Around me, conversations slowly began to resume, but I knew that many were still watching me, waiting for my reaction. I wanted to disappear, vanish from there, but my body seemed stuck to the ground. As I looked at that envelope, several memories began to surface, as if awakened by that moment. I remembered all the times my family put me down, even if they disguised it with a smile, like when they asked me to serve everyone because you're so helpful, while the others sat comfortably. Or when, at Sunday gatherings, they always called me to carry boxes, set tables, arrange chairs, and if I hesitated, someone would say, "Ah, but you're the strongest, right?" I also remembered a birthday when everyone received gifts and I only got a "thank you for helping," and when my opinions were interrupted or ignored as easily as a door is slammed shut. They weren't explicit aggressions. They were small stones thrown day after day, until an invisible wall formed between me and the rest of the family. And at that moment, in front of everyone, I realized that this contract wasn't an isolated incident. It was just another chapter in an old story. The story of someone being underestimated for so long that people no longer even noticed what they were doing. And that's the kind of pain no one sees, but that leaves a deep mark. Anyone watching this video has probably experienced something similar. That moment when you realize you've been placed in a position you didn't choose. That instant when you discover that, for some, your worth is measured by what you do, not by who you are. And it's precisely this identification that hurts and at the same time connects us, because almost everyone has been diminished, ignored, or treated as if they were less than they truly are. As the party raged on around me, unease grew within me like a wave about to overflow. And I knew that sooner or later something inside me would explode, not in anger but in decision, a decision that would change everything. After receiving that absurd contract, I tried to move away from the main table for a bit. I didn't want to draw attention or create a worse atmosphere than the one that already existed. I walked to the side corridor, where some people were chatting more discreetly, believing that I could breathe there for a few seconds. But as soon as I approached the half-open door that led to the kitchen, I heard something that made my stomach churn. "Ah, he doesn't care," said a female voice, laughing softly, as if commenting on something obvious. Another replied with cruel nonchalance, "It's the only job he knows how to do. Letting him handle the contract is even better. It avoids confusion." There was more laughter, those quick, sharp laughs that don't hurt the one laughing, but cut deeply into the target. I stood motionless for a few moments, trying to understand if I had really heard that. My heart began to beat faster, and I felt my hands grow cold. Before I could move away, another phrase pierced the air, spoken with a decisive tone. "It's best to make it clear from the start. That way he doesn't expect to be treated the same." That last sentence struck a chord deep within me. It wasn't about a ridiculous gift or household chores anymore. It was about position, about hierarchy, about worth. And in that second, an internal conflict arose that paralyzed me. Why did my own family think I was worth less? What had I done throughout my life to be seen that way, as someone limited to fulfilling orders, jobs, and obligations that no one else wanted to take on? As I stood there, unnoticed, my mind began to review years and years of shared experiences. Every gesture, every seemingly innocent phrase, every moment they put me in my place. A place I never questioned, perhaps because I thought it was temporary, or just a phase, or even because I believed that helping was my way of contributing. But there, at that baby shower, I realized they had transformed my effort into a label, my support into a function, my goodwill into an identity. And that realization opened a deep yet necessary wound. Because at that moment, I finally saw clearly what was happening. I wasn't being treated as part of the family, but as a useful tool they could call upon whenever they needed. And that understanding, emerging from the shadows of behind-the-scenes conversations, would change everything from then on. After overhearing those hushed conversations, I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I leaned against the hallway wall and took a deep breath, trying to control the turmoil brewing. Inside, the air felt heavy, almost rough, rushing in and out with difficulty. My eyes began to burn, not only from the tears that threatened to escape, but from the silent anger burning in my chest. It was a mixture of hurt, indignation, and disappointment, so intense that my hands trembled without me even realizing it. I stood there for a few seconds, motionless, staring at the envelope crumpled by the grip of my fingers. It was as if that piece of paper represented everything that had been happening for years, but that I had never put into words. And at that moment I realized I had reached my limit. For the first time I felt something different, a force that didn't come from the need to please, nor from the obligation to be useful, but from a deep instinct for self-preservation. An inner voice, previously muffled, began to grow louder. I took another deep breath, this time letting the air in as if I were cleansing something inside me. When I opened my eyes, something had changed. I couldn't and wouldn't accept the role imposed on me. Not like this, not after everything I had heard. The truth is, for so long I myself had accepted small humiliations, believing it was better to avoid conflict. But there, with that contract in my hands, I understood something painful and liberating. Sometimes it takes a low blow for you to discover your own strength. With firm steps, I returned to the room. The party continued merrily, as if nothing had happened. But inside, the decision had already been made. I looked at each face there, at the people who had so often benefited from my silence, and I realized that I owed nothing to anyone. I was not inferior. I was not an employee. I was not the one who does the heavy lifting. I was part of that family, and I deserved to be treated as such, without raising my voice, without making a scene, just with the firmness of someone who has finally found themselves. I placed the envelope on the main table. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was soft, but enough to attract a few glances. And at that moment I decided something that would change my entire trajectory from then on. I would no longer accept being put down. I would no longer be invisible. When I placed the contract on the main table, no one immediately understood what it meant. The conversations continued at a comfortable pace, but one or two people noticed my gesture and stopped. I maintained a steady gaze, my body erect, without any sign of hesitation. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for approval, nor trying to avoid discomfort. I was there to state my boundary. In a calm voice, but imbued with a firmness I didn't even know I possessed, I said, "I'm not going to sign that. It's not my role, and I'm not going to take on that responsibility just because you decided I should." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. The change was immediate. Gazes that had previously been scattered turned to me, and people's expressions ranged from surprise and judgment to something I could only describe as shock. My sister-in-law, still holding the luxury stroller, frowned as if she didn't understand why this was a problem. An aunt shook her head disapprovingly, as if I were being ungrateful. Others just watched, uncomfortable, as if my decision had disrupted the perfect script of that afternoon. But strangely, I felt light. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bowing my head. Someone tried to laugh to lighten the mood. Another said, "Oh, don't take it so seriously, it's just a joke." But I knew it wasn't, it never was. That wasn't a joke. It was the result of years of being stuck in the same place they were trying to push me back into, and I wasn't going back there. I gathered my things calmly. I didn't make long speeches. I didn't respond to provocations. I didn't explain more than necessary. My gestures spoke for themselves. I walked to the door, while the room murmured muffled comments, disguised judgments and glances. That tried to measure me. When I put my hand on the doorknob, I felt something strange. Dignity. A dignity that perhaps had always been there, but that I had never allowed to surface. I left the party with firm steps, without looking back, even knowing that many were interpreting me in the worst possible way, as someone too sensitive, too dramatic, too ungrateful. But deep down, I knew it was the opposite. I was simply recognizing my own worth. And sometimes, leaving a place where you've never been seen is the first step in finding out who you really are. The first few days after the party were strange. The family's silence seemed louder than any noise that could possibly exist. No one spoke to me directly, but I knew that groups, side conversations, and opinions were circulating. Still, I stood firm. I didn't regret my decision for a second, and, little by little, the consequences began to appear. On the third day, I received my first unexpected message. It was from a cousin I hardly ever spoke to. He wrote, "I saw what happened. It was awful. Nobody deserved that. You did the right thing. Simple, direct, but full of honesty. That opened a window of light." Soon after, a teenage niece sent me another message, saying that if she were in my place, she would have cried in front of everyone. She said she admired my courage. These small demonstrations began to break the isolation I imagined I was facing. As the week went on, more messages arrived, discreet, careful, sent almost as if the senders were afraid of being seen supporting someone who dared to go against the family's natural order, but even timid, they were sincere. "You endured a lot in silence," said an uncle. "I think we've lost control." It was as if they had finally realized that the scene at the baby shower wasn't just a lack of tact, it was cruelty disguised as a joke, confessed a cousin. And then something happened that I never expected. My sister-in-law called me to talk. She was different, more serious, less radiant than on the day of the party. She sat down with me and confessed that, after the excitement of the luxury stroller wore off, she began to see things differently. She said she realized that that grand gift wasn't exactly about her or the baby, but about competition, image, and appearances. I was used as a showcase. She admitted it, and I only realized that because his reaction made me think. The conversation was strangely candid. It didn't erase what happened, but it showed that not everything was as simple as it seemed. She too was caught in a game she didn't realize she was playing, and as these truths emerged, a new feeling began to grow within me. The certainty that, even though I came across as the villain that day, I had done the only thing I could truly have done, and this was beginning to resonate, not only within me, but in the conscience of those around me. As the days passed, with each message arriving, each reflection arising, and each truth. Finally revealing itself, something began to change within me. The initial pain, that mixture of shame and humiliation, gave way to a clarity I had never felt before. It was as if, for the first time, I was seeing my own story clearly, and this clarity brought something valuable: self-esteem. I realized that for years I had accepted emotional crumbs, thinking it was enough. I had allowed myself to always be put in lesser positions, believing it was just family dynamics, when in reality it was a silent pattern of constant devaluation. But in that moment of rupture, I broke that cycle, without yelling, without humiliating anyone, without starting a war, just by being true to myself. And that, ironically, made some people see me for the first time. This emotional evolution didn't happen overnight, but it did. I felt confidence return to my heart, not as empty pride, but as a legitimate recognition that I deserved respect, and that I myself needed to be the first to set that boundary. The dignity I felt leaving that party transformed into something greater. The certainty that I would no longer be placed in roles I didn't choose. The certainty that my voice had value. The certainty that my presence was no less than anyone else's. And as I revisited everything that had happened, a phrase formed in my mind with the force of a profound truth. The most expensive gift doesn't always reveal love. Sometimes the simplest reveals truth. The luxury car represented status, appearance, competition. But the simple envelope revealed something much bigger: how they really saw me. And it was precisely this painful revelation that allowed me to rewrite who I wanted to be from then on. Ultimately, it wasn't about the gift I gave or received. It was about seeing my own worth beyond what others expected of me. It was about leaving behind a place where I wasn't seen, and finally occupying the space I always deserved. Have you ever been in a situation where you were put in a place you didn't deserve? Share your story in the comments and share this video with someone who needs to learn to value themselves.